Hello, everybody, and either welcome or welcome back to my podcast. As always, I do like to remind you, if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. So the past couple of weeks have been kind of dark politically, so I decided today we should do something that's a little more fun. I have a piece here from HuffPo titled, How Capitalism Has Screwed Women Over. So, obviously, we're going to do a little read along on this, and this is going to be obviously a some idiot wrote this kind of piece. So let's go ahead and get into it. Like I said, the title of the piece is How Capitalism Has Screwed Women Over by Richard D. Wolff. Alright, Richard's here to mansplain to us ladies how capitalism screwed us over, so y'all ready? Ladies, you ready to hear Richard explain how capitalism sucks and we're all getting fucked over by it? Alright, let's go. Okay. It has been 1 year since the explosion of the Me Too movement that followed allegations against Harvey Weinstein. Since then, the Me Too hashtag has been used around 19 million times to expose and discuss workplace sexual harassment. Women are raising their voices. The struggle is multifaceted, but at its heart, women want economic and political equality with men. They are also increasingly questioning capitalism, the system that has allowed and maintained their subordination. Alright, setting aside my thoughts on whether third/fourth wave feminism actually does want economic and political equality with men, as opposed to political and economic superiority over men. So you kind of already get where this piece is going. Like, this is just going to be a steaming pile of bullshit. And this, you can already tell because of the use of the word subordination. Which, why? I don't understand why socialists view the employer-employee relationship as this awful, horrible, onerous thing, but yet you don't seem to understand how it'll work when it's you and the state, an entity that's going to have even less responsibility towards you than your employer does. But, moving on in the piece. To understand how women have been systematically denied so much of what capitalism has provided to their male peers, we need to go back to a pre-capitalist age. Okay, if any of you guys know anything about socialists, you know where we're about to go, right? Right? You can take a guess? You ready? Let's go. Before capitalism, there was feudalism. What the fuck is their obsession with feudalism? Like, why can they not go 10 minutes without discussing feudalism? Like, even in the Communist Manifesto, it's feudalism. Feudalism. Like, that's all they want to talk about. Like, what in the fuck is their obsession with it? But, going back. Before capitalism, there was feudalism. A social structure in which most people, serfs, worked for and answered to lords, who in return granted them land and protection. There was often little or no use for money. Lords did not hire workers. Instead, the subordination was personal and church-sanctioned. People were tied to the land on which they were born, and there wasn't the separation we take for granted today between work and home. Well, Richard, that would be because feudalism is a fancy fucking word for slavery. People were slaves to lords before capitalism. So, are you really gonna bitch about capitalism coming along and freeing slaves from being stuck on a plot of land for generations, working for a lord and having no opportunity to do anything else at any point in their life? Really? Okay. Alright, you make that argument, dude. You ain't gonna hear me make it. But back to the piece. When the transition from feudalism to capitalism began, starting in 17th century England before spreading globally, enthusiastic supporters promised the new economic system would bring the individual freedom, equality, social solidarity, and democracy people longed for. The slogan of the French Revolution that overthrew feudalism was liberty, equality, fraternity. To this, the American Revolution added democracy. No. I mean, it definitely did give individual freedom, and it gave you a chance to actually, make your own decisions about your life and maybe not be stuck on a plot of land for all of your days and your children's days and your grandchildren's days. As far as equality and social solidarity, well, that's a little more equal than a feudalistic relationship between a lord and their serfs. I mean, I would rather engage in free trade with somebody and actually work for somebody and get a sum of money in which then I can take and spend however I see fit, rather than working some plot of land for some dude and just getting whatever the hell I get from him because, that's all you could hope for under feudalism. Again, you're not really making the case that capitalism sucks. You're making the case that capitalism was pretty fucking cool. Okay, moving on, back to the piece. For men, capitalism meant escape from belonging to a lord, being tied to the land, and from rigid hierarchies. Now they were free to sell their labor to whoever they wanted, without any moral or religious obligations. Woo-sa! Yeah! Go capitalism! Finally, people can actually just engage in mutual voluntary transactions with other people. Woohoo! Again, that doesn't suck. I kind of wonder, did Richard really sit down and think this one out? I don't know. Anyway, they relished their escape from feudalism, even as they found themselves trapped within capitalism's employer-employee relationship. Again, like I said, I'd much rather voluntarily work for somebody and get my wages and go about my business rather than be a slave, Richard. A fucking slave. That's what feudalism was. Slavery. Why does Richard not understand this? Why does Richard not understand that an employer-employee relationship is vastly superior to being a fucking slave? Okay, moving on. But most women were excluded from even the limited benefits that men enjoyed. Capitalism didn't provide decently paid employment for both men and women. The solution was to insist that women stay at home. A man's wages plus a woman's work in the home meant no massive paid jobs needed to be available for women. Capitalists also managed to avoid paying for the childcare that produced their future employees. Alright, let's go back and just dissect this bit by bit. Yeah, okay, I'm sure there were jobs available to men that weren't available to women back then. Obviously, there's really no denying that. And obviously, the more dangerous and higher paying jobs typically went to men, and the more menial, safer, but lower paying jobs went to women. That's not really a surprise there. But this idea that somehow capitalism was responsible for the balance between men going to work and women staying at home. This really had nothing to do with capitalism. This had to do with society's expectations of you as a woman, that even if when you were younger you had gone to school, you learned a trade, you had a job, that as soon as you got married you gave all of that up to go and be a homemaker and have babies and be a mom and a wife and do all that stuff. Now, you can't really put that on capitalism. The only thing that you could really put on capitalism, compared from then to now, is that back then it was expected that a man could go to work and a home could be a single income household, and that a woman would stay home and handle all of the homework, and that she wouldn't have to go to work. So I don't really understand this line of thinking that oh, women didn't go to work because there was no jobs for them. No, women didn't go to work because society didn't expect them to, society actively discouraged them from doing it, and they didn't have to, so they didn't. And then the idea that capitalists also managed to avoid paying for the childcare that produced their future employees. My dude, if a man goes to work and he makes a paycheck and then he takes it home, what the fuck do you think he spends his money on? Obviously he has to pay for a mortgage and utilities and food and basically maintain a lifestyle to where his wife can stay home and take care of their children. That kind of is paying for childcare. It's not doing it in the direct socialist way that you might like, but yeah, paying someone a wage and having them be able to go home and be able to pay all their bills on a single income, yeah, you're footing the bill for the future generation. You're just not doing it in the way that you would like to see it done. Okay, moving on. At home, women cooked meals, cleaned rooms, clothes and dishes, repaired furniture, provided health care and childcare. They worked like feudal serfs. Really, dude? No, you really are betraying a basic understanding of what a feudal serf's life was like. I don't think these women were out there, like, hoeing the fucking field to try to grow things. Like, there's a big difference between being a slave and being a housewife, Richard. You might not view it as different, but there's a big difference, my dude. Anyway, men's lives navigated daily between household feudalism and workplace capitalism. Exploited by capitalists at work, men could in turn exploit their wives at home. Again, what is exploitative about this arrangement? Okay, man goes to work, man gets paycheck, brings paycheck home, pays for things, woman stays home and handles house and home. Like, what's exploitative about that? And if you really want to start going down that road and having that argument, and if you do feel like being a housewife is exploitative, guess what gave women the option to not do that anymore? Yeah, it was capitalism. It was the ability to, if you so chose, you could go out into the world and get a job and not be reliant on a man and not have to live that life if you don't want to live it. That's what enabled that. Like, I don't. Richard, why do you not understand things? Why? But let's keep going because it gets worse. It's women's subordination inside households that has produced many of the inequalities, discriminations, and abuses women are protesting to this day. Richard. You. Every time somebody makes this argument, it reveals their own personal bias. And to be sure, I am not a trad girl. I don't live the trad life. It ain't for me. If y'all want to do it, that is your choice, via con Dios, as long as you're doing it because it is your choice. And now, because of capitalism, you do have a choice. Like, you can choose to live that life. You can choose to not live that life. But it's this idea, and I see it thrown at a lot of these girls, that somehow you're less than if that's the life you choose. That somehow you are subordinate to a man, or that a man is exploiting you somehow. And not that you're making an active choice to say, you know what, I don't want to live that life. I don't want to have a career. I don't want to do that. I want to stay home. I want to raise my children. I want to take care of house and home. This is the job that I am choosing to do. This is the labor that I want to do with my life. So, yeah, good job showing your bias there, Richard. All right, moving on here. Over the last century, huge numbers of women started to work outside the home, led by poorer women. World War II saw large numbers of women entering the workforce. Then, in the 1970s, automation and globalization ended the long tradition of rising real wages in the U.S. Now, it's funny that he brings up World War II as far as women entering the workplace, because this is a topic that I do get kind of wonkish on, because personally I find this era of just like our domestic U.S. history insanely fascinating, and I wish there was more like just historical work done on it. I wish there was more books written on it. I wish there was more movies made about it, because it is such an insanely fascinating time to me. And I bring it up in this context because women entering the workforce in World War II didn't have anything to do with capitalism or money at all, per se. It was that the U.S. got to the point where we had so many troops stationed overseas that we just literally did not have enough able-bodied men left in the country to do factory work. So the government came up with Rosie the Riveter. Like, you all know Rosie the Riveter, oh, we can do it. Yeah, that was government propaganda to get women interested in the idea of leaving the house and going and doing quote-unquote man's work in factories. So it wasn't like they were forced to do this. It was something that was pitched to them as pretty much like a last-ditch effort to try to get factory workers, because somebody still had to make the bullets, and somebody still had to rivet the metal, and somebody still had to do all of those factory jobs. But there just weren't enough able-bodied men left to do it. So again, Richard doesn't quite understand the history of workplace policies and why women started going to work in the first place. And actually, what's interesting is that once the men came back, women were expected to quit their jobs and go back home, which obviously I think led a lot to what ended up happening with that first wave feminist revolution and the second wave, is that idea that women can run households, women can work outside of the house, and kind of trying to shove them back into that secondary position. I think that's really the backlash that caused the feminist movement. But that's really neither here nor there as far as reviewing this piece. That's just my little side tangent because, like I said, I'm really weird and wonkish about that era. And then just bringing up that in the 70s, automation and globalization. There's that word again. Always the boogeyman. Oh, globalization. It's just all the ills of the world is all globalization. Ye golly. Anyway, back to the piece. So, women entered the workplace to bring more money into the family. Again, I just told you why that is false. That's not how it went down at all. And in doing so, they often shouldered the burdensome double shift of home and work. Women also tended to be funneled into pink-collar jobs, such as retail nursing or teaching, which were paid less. Now, back in the day, especially if we're going back to like the 60s and 70s, there weren't as many barriers to entering those jobs as there are now. It's not like, I mean, obviously to be a nurse now, like you have to go to medical school, essentially. If you want to be a teacher and get paid any kind of decent wage, you have to go and get a master's degree. Like, there are some pretty high hurdles to getting into it now, but back then there wasn't so much. So yeah, if you are somebody who's kind of coming off the bench and you don't have a degree and you don't have work experience, then yes, you're going to go into the lower skilled jobs. That is what it is. Like, that's not a fault of capitalism. That's just a fault of getting jobs that require more experience or more education that women up to that point typically didn't have because they didn't have an opportunity to get it, which again, thanks to capitalism, now we have the opportunities to go get this education, to go get the better jobs, to make more money so that you can be an emancipated person. But back to the piece. All the while, across workplaces, women had to deal with men's competitive anxieties. This often manifested itself in men's attempt to extend household inequality to the workplace. As the Me Too movement makes clear, they still do, and the costs are heavy. Now, Richard. Things for women when they entered the workforce back in the 60s and 70s, and even the 80s, were a hell of a lot different than they are right now. Like, women back then did really face an uphill battle, and there was a lot of bullshit that they had to put up with. That's true. There ain't no denying that. But to pretend like that environment still exists today is to either grossly over-exaggerate how women are treated in the workplace today, or to just completely minimize how women were treated in the workplace back in decades past. So, again, no, it's not. We're not like it's not like the 60s and 70s where it was considered okay to like slap a woman on the ass or make comments about her tits or anything like that. Like, no, we've evolved a bit, Richard, and I'm not saying that it's equal everywhere at all times, but it ain't as bad as it used to be, and it ain't as bad as Richard's making it out to be. But moving on. But as women fight for equality with men, many have realized the ultimate problem is not the men. Rather, it is the system that has positioned men and women in an unequal economic relationship with employers that infects all other aspects of their relationships. Oh, wait a minute. So now Richard wants to pivot. Now you want to try to make the argument that all through the rest of this piece, you've been arguing that men and women have been treated unequally. Now you're trying to make the argument that they're being treated unequally in an equally unequal way? No, dude. You're disproving your whole thesis from the beginning of the piece. Like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Why, Richard? Just say you want socialism. Don't try to dress this up. Anyway, moving on because we're almost done. There is a movement of women who want more than just to work alongside the men within a capitalist system that continues to subordinate and exploit them both. Again, one more time for the people in the back. How exactly is going to work for somebody as at-will employment and getting a paycheck somehow exploitative or subjugating or anything along those lines? Like, if you don't like your job, you can leave. You can get another job. You're not forced to stay in a particular job for your whole life. It's not like feudalism where you're stuck on a plot of land for fucking generations. Like, you have the ability to change your situation. Like, if you don't like your workplace, you can find another job. If you want a raise, you can either approach your employer for a raise or start shopping around for a job that's going to pay you more. Like, capitalism gives you options that nothing else gives you. Like, socialism doesn't give you these options. Obviously, feudalism didn't give you these options. But to the last paragraph. To do that requires that we reorganize how we run homes and businesses in ways neither capitalist nor feudal. Wait, now we're reorganizing homes too? Wait, what? I thought we were just working with work. What, now we're doing the home too? Oh my God, Richard. Instead, workplaces can be organized as democratic communities. One person, one vote decides all key workplace matters. The premise of such worker co-ops is that the democracy Americans endorse for politics belongs as well in economics. Such a change could free women and men from being trapped in the system that serves neither. Alright, let's scroll this back for a second, because obviously Richard doesn't seem to quite understand how our democracy works. It doesn't work off popular vote, my dude. If it did, Hillary would be president. And moreover to this point, and just to slide this in here, the 51-49 rule, which is to say that if you did one person, one vote, and just popular vote, then 51% of the people can decide what everybody's going to do. And what the fuck are the other 49% of the people going to do? Obviously, in this particular situation, those people are going to view this as possibly exploitative, as possibly subjugating, because now they're working under conditions that they didn't choose and that they didn't vote for. But because 51% of the people decided that this is what we're going to do, all of a sudden 100% of the people have to do it. And that's not really fair. Like, that's not really how this should work, and there's a reason why our voting system doesn't work that way. Anyway, beyond the scope of this piece, but yeah, there's a reason why we don't do popular votes, and that is the reason why. So, poor Richard. I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with socialists. I don't know why they. I don't get it. Who teaches them this stuff? Like, I guess college or somebody? Like, I'm not entirely sure. But one thing I am sure of, and the one thing I do want to finish up this particular episode with, is the fact that there is one thing on this planet that has emancipated more women across the globe, not just in the US, but especially in second world and third world countries, and that is capitalism. The ability to have your own private property, to choose who you do and do not wish to engage with, to be able to go out, work, have your own money, so that you aren't subject to the whims of your husband or your father or your tribal leader or whatever dude runs your particular community. You don't have to live that life because you have choices. That's what capitalism buys you. That's what money buys you. It buys you choices. And that has been the most important thing to happen to women anywhere on the globe at any point, is the idea that because of capitalism, you can be an individual. You can be a free person. You can make your own decisions. You're not tied to a feudal lord or a husband or a family or anything like that. So, no, capitalism didn't fucking screw any of us over. It's the only reason why we are able to have what we are able to have as individual people who happen to be women. So, no, Richard, capitalism didn't screw us over. Capitalism set us free, dude. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. If you did like it, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. Take care, and until next time.